Everyone, thank you all for joining us for today's CAPER and eCon Planning Suite webinar. I'm very glad you all can join us today. My name is Chris Andrews. I am with the Cloudburst Group and am joined by John Coons, also from the Cloudburst Group, and Beth Hendricks and Marlisa Grogan from HUD. Beth and Marlisa, would you like to say hello?
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here with you.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Marlisa. And John, thank you for being here as well. Today's webinar will last about 90 minutes. After the webinar, we will make sure to post all of the PowerPoint slides, the transcript, the recording of this webinar on the HUD Exchange. So if for some reason you have a follow-up question, if you'd like to see the content, if you're not able to stay with us for the whole 90 minutes, all of those materials will be posted on the HUD Exchange. And we will make sure to send out a link to where those materials are when we post them. As you're settling in for the webinar, finishing your lunch, finishing your breakfast, depending on your time zone, ask that you all close your email, close any other programs. It will help with the running of the GoToWebinar software and can keep us all here together for this webinar. If you do experience any technical difficulty with the audio or the video portions, the screen sharing of the webinar, we ask you that you try to log off and log back in, or submit a question through the question pane in the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we have technicians standing by to support you all. We do have a full we're asking that you submit any questions that you may have through the questions pane in the GoToWebinar toolbar. We will then be answering as many questions as we can verbally. We may not be able to get to all of your questions today, and if we're not, you can follow up and you can submit those through the HUD Exchange Ask a Question. And before we get started on the discussion around the CAPER, just wanted to talk through a couple of more general eCon Planning Suite updates. Hopefully you all are very aware that your 2017 action plans are due to be submitted by August 16th. All 2017 action plans must be submitted by August 16th. And those action plans, they must include your 2017 allocation. Beth, anything else that you would just like to highlight on that submittal of the 2017?
So just remember that submission means that you have sent the plan in through the eCon Plan Suite, and it says submitted for review. In addition to that, submission also means that your SF-424 forms and your executed original certifications have also been sent into the field office by August the 16th.
Great. Thank you, Beth. And also for some of you out there, you may have received supplemental ESG funds. If you have, those ESG funds should be added as an expected resource under ESG in your action plan. Grantees must follow all of their citizen participation requirements as set forth in the regs and in your citizen participation plan to be including those funds in your 2017 action plan. If you have any issues in completing that by August 16th, contact your field office immediately. Go ahead and log off right now and reach out to your field office. For those supplemental funds, you only need to amend your consolidated plan if you're adding or changing any con plan goals. Otherwise, those funds are treated as ESG. And Marlisa, anything that you would like to to add to that?
I would just remind everyone that, you know, we're being flexible as far as the updates for the supplemental ESG. So reiterating that it's really important for you to meet the 8/16 deadline. We can give you additional time to make the ESG supplemental updates.
Thank you, Marlisa. And now turning to the CAPER, we'll start with an overview of the CAPER data, and how the CAPER relates to the eCon planning suite and your projects and your activities. Talk through the Complan goals and accomplishments report, as well as other MicroStrategy reports that can be helpful in developing and completing your CAPER. The process of setting up and then actually completing your CAPER screens. Talking through CAPER and ESG and the requirements for the eCart. We'll provide a few scenarios for troubleshooting common issues, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Before we get started, we'd like to just know a little bit more about all of you on the phone. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a couple of poll questions. The first poll question is, what are your program year dates? What is your Complan cycle to begin January 1, April 1, July 1, or October 1? And this is great just to give us all a sense of where you fall in your CAPER timeline. Okay, I'm waiting on a few more of you, so we'll just give you all a few more seconds to respond. Okay, and looking at the results of the poll, the vast majority of you are on a July 1 to June 30 program year cycle. So your CAPERs are coming due within the next few weeks. About 20% of you on a federal fiscal year cycle of October 1 to September 30th. So you're thinking about your CAPERs near the end of this calendar year. And then a small number of you as January 1 and a April 1 start date. Let's just ask one more question for you all. I'm just wanting to understand what are your roles within IDIS? So are you responsible for developing the action plan, responsible for developing the CAPER, developing both, or are you not responsible for either the action plan or the CAPER? Great, we'll just give a few more seconds if you still completing the poll. And it looks like about 70% of you are involved in developing both your action plans and your CAPERs. And this is great. As we're talking through the structure of the CAPER setup, a lot of your CAPER setup really begins with how your Complan and how your action plan are set up and designed in terms of your goals, in terms of your projects, and then how those filter through to your CAPER. And so we'll take a few minutes to walk through those relations from your setup of your goals in the Complan to the action plan to your projects, all the way into the CAPER. Excellent. Let me just, okay. Coming back to the PowerPoint. Our goals for today, we want to focus on identifying strategies and best practices to ensure that data is properly populating your CAPER template and where you know to pull or to validate additional data that you may need in your CAPER. 2, talking through the process for using the Complan Goals and Accomplishments MicroStrategy Report, as well as other MicroStrategy reports to complement and again to validate the CAPER. We'll complete a high-level walkthrough of setting up your CAPER and the process for completing and submitting your CAPER in IDIS. And then discuss common issues and strategies to address those issues that we've seen over the past couple of years. And with that, let's get started in talking through CAPER basics. The CAPER is your time in your Complan cycle to really tell your story of what you accomplished, to share all of your successes, all of the great work and projects that you've been working on over the past year or the past couple of years, and to share that with your community, to share that with your city, your county council, or state departments, to share with your stakeholders, and to share with HUD. The CAPER is very much you just telling your story of the past year. Your CAPERs, they are due 90 days after the end of the program year. So for those of you who are on that July 1 to June 30th start date, I'm sure you all are very aware that your CAPERs are coming due in the next several weeks. All CAPERs must be entered and submitted in IDIS. This is all part of the eCon planning suite. And again, the linking of your data from your Complan all the way through to your CAPER. And then an important caveat for consortia grantees, and I know in looking at the list of registrants for today's session, we have a number of consortia grantees on the line with us today. Every consortia grantee, lead or participating, is responsible for creating their own CAPER in IDIS. While the Complan, the action plan, those are set up by the lead grantee, every grantee participating or lead within the consortia, and this is same for regional grantees as well, you are responsible for creating your own CAPER template in IDIS. And let's start just in looking at the relationship between data from your consolidated plan through your action plan down into your CAPER. And so beginning here at the top of the screen, you see that we have 5 goals to the consolidated plan. As you move forward in year 1, you may be doing any number of those goals in your year 1 annual action plan, and you would carry those goals forward into your action plan and indicate, yes, we are doing all of the goals, we're doing some of the goals or some share of the goals in your annual action plan. In your CAPER for year 1, you are then responsible on reporting on the accomplishments and the outcomes of those goals in your action plan that are then tied to your projects. Those are coming into your CAPER for year 1 and are the priorities for your reporting in your accomplishments and your outcome. In year 2, you may continue on with those 3 goals, and you may also then do the 2 additional goals in your consolidated plan. And so then in your year 2 action plan, you're now including these 5 goals. You're developing your projects and your activities based on those 5 goals. And then in your CAPER, you are now reporting on all of those goals, on all of those 5 goals. In year 3, you may realize to add an additional goal. There may be one more goal that wasn't in our con plan that we would like to include. You'll need to go back to your consolidated plan and amend that goal, or to amend your goals in your consolidated plan to be able to include that goal in your year 3 action plan, and then ultimately be including and reporting on that in your CAPER. We'll get into a little bit more into the project setup on the next screen, but really where all your projects are coming from are here in that middle bar in the annual action plan. And those are really helping to inform your CAPER. But I think the important takeaway from here, and something that Beth and I have talked a lot about in looking at the structure of CAPERs in the econ planning suite, is that within the CAPER, you're really reporting on your accomplishments as they relate back to those goals, to the macro level. You're not reporting on accomplishments at an individual project level. The story that you want to be telling is saying, we set this goal as part of our 5-year con plan. We included this goal as part of our 1-year action plan. And now you're telling the story of the accomplishments and the outcomes related to that goal or to those goals. Beth, before we move on to talk about the project structure in a little bit more detail, anything that you would like to add on this slide?
So Chris just made a really important point. We're really used to looking at projects and counting accomplishments assigned to each individual project. And the difference is with the regulations for the CAPER, it's really about how do accomplishments align with goals. It never really speaks about specific projects. So if you had a project that you assigned more than one goal to, we'll need to talk about doing some reconciliation of that accomplishment data so that we're really tracking that accomplishment data to each goal, not to each project. And we'll talk about that a little further in this webinar.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Now looking and really wanting to focus in on how do those consolidated plan, your strategic plan goals tie to your annual action plan goals that then tie down into your projects and come back into your CAPER. Starting here at the top in the red boxes, we'll just focus in on one potential strategic plan goal as rehabbing existing housing stock. And in developing that goal, setting the 5-year outcome metric, the goal outcome indicator for that goal as 200 units being rehabbed. And moving from the 5-year period to the 1-year annual action plan period, you're including that goal as your goal for the year. And for the year, you are indicating that your goal is 40 units to be rehabbed. Right? And you're assuming that you may just be doing 40 units per year to hit that 5-year goal of 200. From the annual action plan, you then are breaking that data down into your projects and ultimately into your activities, but in the action plan, it stays at the project level, and are establishing a project of homeowner rehab, and again, indicating that your goal outcome indicators are 40 units rehabbed. Now, when it comes time for your CAPER, what you are reporting on is how you did in your performance as it relates to your annual action plan and to your consolidated plan. So you're reporting on, you had a strategic plan, a goal of 200 units expected, an annual action plan of 40 units, and then maybe your IDIS accomplishments through the project were only 35. Right? And your CAPER is where you're reporting back on your success as it related to the annual goal and to the strategic plan goal. And I know I sound a little bit like a broken record here, but I think the important thing that we want to take away from these two slides is that your CAPER is, everything is reporting back into your goals and your accomplishments in achieving and reaching and fulfilling those goals that you set forth at the strategic plan level and at the annual level. Now, in developing your CAPER and in telling that story of your accomplishments as they're tying into your strategic and annual plan goals, your CAPER is pulling from a number of data sources. It's pulling directly from your action plan, from your annual plan goals, saying that we anticipate X number of goal outcome indicators. In the example on the last slide, 40 rehab units was the plan number. It is then pulling from your activity accomplishment data within IDIS, where you're actually entering these were the accomplishments for these activities, and those activities are tied to projects that are then, of course, tied back to those annual goals and the strategic plan goals. And then for the ESG portion of the CAPER, there's data that's pulling from HMIS, and Marlisa and I will talk more about that in a little bit. And again, I think the important thing here is that the CAPER is organizing all of your accomplishment data by the goal, not by the project, not by the activity. Now, just by you all, in the Go-To webinar panel, you are able to raise your hand up or down. So go ahead, if you completed, I'm going to lower everyone's hand right now. But if you completed the CAPER for your jurisdiction last year, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, so a good number of you were involved in completing or developing your CAPER last year. Go ahead, I'm going to lower everyone's hand again. But we're going to spend a few minutes now just talking through some of the issues that may come up in gathering CAPER data and activities that you should make sure to implement as workarounds to those CAPER data issues. The CAPER is pulling all of the data from IDIS, right? And there are a number of different reasons why that data may not be populating correctly. The first, and this is one of the most common issues we see, is that the most recent annual action plan that is intended to be the basis for your CAPER is not marked as review completed. The CAPER defaults in setup to associating with the most recently review completed action plan in the system. And if when you set up your CAPER, if that action plan is not marked as review completed, your CAPER will not be pulling from that action plan. And so if you have your status here set to open in progress, if it's set to submitted, if it's an open in progress field office review, if it's set for waiting for modification, you need to either go ahead and submit that plan, or if it's been submitted, follow up with your field office and make sure that they are going to set that as review completed prior to creating your CAPER in IDIS. When your CAPER is created in IDIS, it is pulling a snapshot of all of your data at that point in time. So if that action plan is not review completed at that time that you create your CAPER, even if you do it the next day or 2 days later, it won't update any of the data in your CAPER. So again, those action plans must be marked as review completed. And if it is just marked as submitted, request that your field office change your action plan to review completed. tied to this are any amendments that you may have. And again, let's just go ahead and do, I'm going to lower everyone's hand again. If you have completed or you're going to complete an amendment in 2016, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. It looks about half of you, maybe a little bit more than half of you, have raised your hand. I'm wondering how many of you actually physically raised your hand in asking you to raise your hand out there too. As I will admit, I raised my hand as a demonstration in asking you all to raise your hand in the GoTo webinar. But for those of you who are doing an amendment to your 2016 action plan, that amendment needs to be submitted and also needs to be marked as review completed prior to creating your CAPER. So if you have an action plan that you've created and it's set in open in progress or set submitted for review, you need to make sure that amendment is marked as review completed. And Beth, I think you would agree this is maybe one of the most common issues that we see in issues with data around the CAPER setup, of that amendment not being marked as review completed.
I would agree. And if there's anything you take away from today's webinar, one of the most important pieces to understand the eCon Planning Suite is that the review completed status is basically telling the system, download information from those plans into the next document, whether it happens to be the next CAPER or the next annual action plan. And as long as your plan or your CAPER are not in that status, the system doesn't know to pull any of that prior information into the next document. So real important, review completed tells the system pull information into that next document that's being created. It may be an issue this year, particularly because our allocations came out so late and you've got such a late start on being able to start this year's annual action plan. It's going to be really important that you make sure your plan is in review completed prior to starting that CAPER document. It's going to take some time this year because your field offices are now either reviewing or about to review your annual action plans. In addition to that, while they're doing that review process, they aren't able to change the status until review completed until the congressional release process for your funding and your grant agreement goes out the door to you as well. So there's going to be some lag time. You need to be aware of that before you start the CAPER in the system.
Excellent. Thank you, Beth. Great point. Okay, and again there, all action plan amendments must be marked as review completed. Other reasons your data may not populate correctly. You may have duplicative projects set up in IDIS. When you create your action plan and on the AP35 screen, you are creating those projects automatically copy over into the projects tab in IDIS. So you do not need to create that same project as a new project under the projects tab. When you create it in the action plan, it automatically carries over into the rest of IDIS. Just as an example here, just to see, if you have your public services project that you created in your annual action plan, let's just say here in this example that I created, it's IDIS project ID number 3 that was created in your action plan. You don't then need to go and create an additional project, what would here be project number 12, as the same project. If you're having duplicative projects and associating activities with the one that is not tied to your action plan and therefore not tied to your goals at both the annual and then at the strategic plan level, that data won't carry forward. So you have two options if this occurs. Option number one is to reassociate those activities with projects created in the action plan. So if you have an activity tied to a project that might be a duplicative project, you can go into IDIS and you can change the association of that activity to be with the project that is tied to the action plan. Option number two is to amend your annual action plan to include the correct project that has your activities tied to it. Something I always recommend to grantees, would encourage all of you to do, is as you're finishing your action plan setup, go into your projects tab, review all of the projects for that year, and just make sure that they're all correct under the projects tab, that everything carried over and you didn't accidentally create a duplicative project, or you didn't accidentally create a project from a prior year, but you can confirm under the projects tab that you have all of those projects right there. Just a few more reasons of why data may not populate correctly in your CAPER is that prior year projects were copied into the current year action plan. And so just as a reminder, we've done a number of eCon Planning Suite and Complan webinars this spring and summer, and something that we've talked about in a few of them is when you create a copy of your action plan, it will automatically copy your prior year projects forward into that new year, and you're not able to change or amend the date of those projects. So if you copied your 2015 action plan to 2016, it would carry forward your 2015 projects. And you need to go into IDIS, remove those projects, and create new 2016 projects. And again, just this is here as you're looking at your program year within your project tab, you'll see you want to make sure this year for 2016 that you're looking at 2016 projects. And again, just a reminder, this is something we see throughout IDIS, throughout the eCon Planning Suite, both in Action Plan and CAPER setup, that when you do copy your action plan, you will need to remove the copied projects and update those projects with the current program year. And finally is your accomplishment data may not be entered. Again, remember, at the point that you create that CAPER is taking a snapshot of your program at that given time. So if you have not yet entered any of your accomplishment data for those activities into IDIS, that accomplishment data won't automatically populate into your CAPER. That CAPER is only pulling from those accomplishments that were entered prior to creating your CAPER. And before moving on, just a couple of clarifications, and there's some great questions coming in. Please do continue to enter those questions. We'll be getting to the questions in just a minute. For your 2016 CAPER, you need to make sure that your 2016 action plan is marked as review completed. So everything is tied there by the program year. So to start your 2016 CAPER, you need to make sure that your 2016 program year action plan is marked as review completed. And again, here just highlighting, again, on that accomplishment data must be entered in IDIS. And for home projects, just a reminder that the accomplishment data is to be entered once that activity has been completed. I'm sure there are a number of you on the line thinking, I've already started my CAPER, we're seeing some of these data issues. Do we need to go in and create a new CAPER template? What do we need to do? And no, there's a number of ways to pull that data, update that data in other ways, and then manually enter it into the CAPER template. And that's using the Complan Goals and Accomplishments report, using other MicroStrategy reports that we'll highlight in just a minute, and then being able to manually update those data fields in the template. And I think for everybody on the line, regardless of at the point that you're creating your CAPER, there may be some manual updates or edits that you need to make to the data in your CAPER. If you have a project that's associated with multiple goals, you'll have to associate that data with one goal and not both to make sure that you're not double counting that data as you report out to your community and report back up to HUD. So everyone is doing some manual updates to the data fields in the template, and it is your responsibility to review and validate all of the data using the Complan Goals and Accomplishments report and using the MicroStrategy reports that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. And so those IDIS reports that are helpful, I guess to start, there are two IDIS reports for all grantees. The PR26 needs to be submitted as part of your CAPER, and for state grantees, the PR28, the CDBG State PER report, needs to be submitted as part of your CAPER. In addition to those two reports, the PR03 and the PR22 are tremendously helpful reports in providing an update of activity data for CDBG and home, and the PR33 and the PR91 provide great data on the finance side for home and for ESG. And we do have John Coons with us today, really to be able to talk through more of the linkages with IDIS and the additional IDIS reports. And John, anything else that you would just like to share in these reports and how they're helpful on the CAPER data?
Yeah, sure, Chris. I'll just add a few little points. I think you covered the broad issues just great. On the PR03 report, again, and as Chris said earlier, it's really good to start using these reports prior to starting your CAPER so that you can get the IDIS data right from the beginning, and then once you're ready to create your CAPER, it's really pulling in the best data that you have available. One thing that some of you may use, some of you may not, but is the BOSMAC report related to the PR03 report, which is an Excel version. And I just find that tremendously helpful in being able to filter and do analysis on the data, just to make sure that everything from it's got all the accomplishment data that you need in there to look at the expenditures and so forth as you go through a detailed review. Similarly, the PR22 on the home side is also that helpful report. A couple nuances there. One is, some of you may be aware there were some issues with the report, but our understanding that the issues have been addressed and the report should be reliable now. And then when you do run the PR22, you must select one of two parameters, either open activities and activities completed or canceled in the last year, or all years. So one thing to remember about the PR22 is that it's based on the 12 months prior to the date the report is run. So it is best to run all selective years when you have that choice of parameters, and you can download it into Excel and then filter by completion date. So that's just a way to make sure you're really getting everything within the program year, unless you happen to be running the report on the very last day of your program year. I think, Chris, you already talked a little bit about the PR 2628 report, which are really those important financial reports that do require user input. So again, that can be pretty complex. There's some good materials on the web to review there. We'll try to answer any questions that may come in. On the PR 33 report, the home matching liability report, a couple things to keep in mind. So again, that's the report that displays the home match liability and can be used to calculate data for including the CAPER. But remember, it's required by the CAPER. The match data in this report is based on the federal fiscal year and not your program year. So just something to keep in mind in the back. The PR 91, again, that's another great report for ESG grantees that breaks out the financial data by activity and subrecipients, which is some interest to them. And I do want to mention one other one. The PR 23 Summary of Accomplishment Report, some of you have been at it for a while, may have used that, and that's a great way for sort of getting some cumulative data if you want to cross-check. So that is running properly again. So those of you who in the past have liked that report and want to use it again, it's not required as part of your CAPER, but it's many of these reports are just good sources to help validate your data prior to starting the CAPER, and then even after you started your CAPER if you need to make any adjustments. So that's a few nuances there, Chris.
Great. Thank you, John. And I think the most important takeaway here is the PR 26 and the PR 28 are the only two required reports for entitlement and for state grantees, respectively. The others are just recommended reports to help support your gathering of CAPER data, your validating of CAPER data, and to supplement or complement elements of your action plan. Would like to continue to the Complan Goals and Accomplishments report. This is also a MicroStrategy report. It does not have a number. For those of you looking for it in MicroStrategy, it is called the Complan Goals and Accomplishments report. And this is a fabulous report to use prior to creating your CAPER. It can give you a snapshot of all of your accomplishment data associated with a action plan or with a program year, and it lists out the data by accomplishment data associated with one strategic plan / annual action plan goal, those accomplishments that might be associated with multiple strategic plan and action plan goals. So that would be if you have a project that is tied to two different strategic plan goals. And going back to that example of the homeowner rehab units, maybe that is tied to a goal for preserving housing stock, and it's also tied to a neighborhood stabilization or a community stabilization goal. That would show that those accomplishments that may be tied for that would show that accomplishment data for projects that may be tied to multiple goals. And then finally, it includes accomplishment information that may not be associated with any strategic plan or action plan goal. And that could be accomplishment data from projects and activities that were from a prior Complan cycle, or that may be from projects that were following that example of duplicative projects that were not set up and linked within your annual action plan and tied to your action plan and strategic plan goals. So I'm going to just pause here and pull up an example of this report, and hopefully this is zoomed in, just to give everyone a a sense of what is the data that you can download. So in downloading the Complan Goals and Accomplishments report, again, you'll see it's broken down into these three sections. First, the accomplishments associated with a single strategic plan goal. And what we see here is we see the goal. In this case, the first is economic development. We see the corresponding goal outcome indicators that were included in projects tied to that goal. And then for each of those goal outcome indicators, we see what was expected over the strategic plan period. So here, just in the case of jobs created or retained, the 5-year goal was 25. The actual outcome to date is 7. So you're seeing that you're 28% complete. And then breaking down by the outcome expected for the annual cycle. So here the goal was 5 jobs created or retained, and the actual was 7. So they're indicating that the percent complete is a little bit higher. For me, again, this is a report to use before creating your CAPER, because you can see the accomplishment data to date and check to make sure that a lot of that accomplishment data is populating here, because your CAPER is pulling from the exact same data source that this report is pulling from. So scrolling down, this is where you would see accomplishments that are associated with more than one strategic plan goal. So again, if you have a project that's tied to 2 or 3 or 4 goals, those accomplishments would be here. And then accomplishments not associated with a strategic plan goal. And most frequently, these are accomplishments that are realized during the program year that are tied to projects and activities that are associated with a prior Complan cycle. So if that Complan cycle ended in 2016, and included this project or this activity, those outcomes would not be appearing in the first tab of accomplishments, because they're not tied to a current Complan strategic plan goal. Beth, before we move on from these reports, is there anything that you would like to add?
I can't state enough. It's really important that you use the reports that John went over in advance, as well as the MicroStrategy report, to get your data really nice and clean and lined up prior to creating the CAPER. That'll help minimize the amount of reconciliation you have to do in the CAPER document. To go back to the basics, for those of you who are new to running reports, there is a IDIS User's Guide on the HUD Exchange, and there is a section within that guide on how to generate reports. So that'll help make life easier for you. And the PR26 report, this spring, we just issued a new troubleshooting guide that walks you through step by step how to use the PR26 and make sure your financial information is correct on that as well.
Thank you, Beth. And so with that, John, I know a number of questions have come in. Let's just take a quick pause before we jump over into IDIS and then into ESG real quick for a couple of questions.
Okay, Chris, yes. So we do have, again, several questions that have come in. Let me start with this one. If I set up my CAPER before entering my accomplishment information, do I need to create a new CAPER?
A great question, and no. All of those reports that John listed off earlier and Beth just highlighted again, along with the Complan Goals and Accomplishments report, are great reports to help validate the data that should be in IDIS or in your CAPER. And so you can use that, and then we'll show you here in a second that you can actually go in and manually update all of the fields in the CAPER template.
And if I could just add, Chris, while you're updating your CAPER document to show what your data really looks like, it's also important that you go back into IDIS and update any information you need to complete there as well. The reason why, your field rep is also pulling those reports to help kind of look at your CAPER data to make sure that it is accurate and correct. And if you haven't gone back into IDIS to complete any of that data, you're going to be looking at two different sets and make your life easier for your field office rep to approve your CAPER quicker and faster.
Great, thank you, Beth. John, other questions coming in?
Yeah, we actually got a couple related to this one. The question is, how do I enter accomplishment data from prior Complan cycles? So another one sort of similar to that. You know, they've had some accomplishments from 16, 17, perhaps those were prior year cycles, and they're not reflected in the CAPER. How can they make sure those accomplishments are included in the CAPER?
Absolutely, and I think this is one of the most common issues that we see related to the CAPER is making sure to add those prior year accomplishments back in. The best place to gather that data is here from the Complan Goals and Accomplishments report, where you're able to, and again, let me pull up just the Excel version here that we have, where you have the third set of data that is accomplishments not associated with the strategic plan. Assuming that those accomplishments have been entered and it's recorded in IDIS under the Activity tab, that data should be populating here in the MicroStrategy report, along with the other activity reports that John highlighted. And you can pull that accomplishment data and then manually enter it into your CAPER in the CR05 accomplishments screen.
Okay. One other question that came in, it should be a quick answer. What reports am I required to upload as part of my CAPER?
So this is Beth, and I can answer. You are not required to upload any of those reports. You do need to send in, you may need to send in a PER if you're having difficulty downloading them, but your field office should be able to pull your PR26 or any of your other reports. If, however, you are updating your PR26 report or your PER to reflect more accurate financial data, you'll want to send that in. You can either upload it to your CAPER or you can send it in separately by email or by regular mail to your field office.
Great, thank you, Beth. Okay, and we'll continue on with the presentation. And we'll just do a quick walkthrough of the CAPER template. So let me just pull over UAT here. And let me. Okay. So again, like the rest of the eCon planning suite, your CAPER is in the plans, projects, and activities. And when you add your CAPER, you will see that all it asks for you is your program year, title, and version. And that is because your CAPER is set to automatically pull from the most recently approved action plan for that program year. So coming in here, just looking at 2016, we see that there was a draft and maybe it was a practice version. It will automatically pull from this CAPER here, this review completed, because that is the most recently approved action plan in the system. So coming back to our CAPER, it created a version for today's session. So I'll go ahead and open that up. And we'll see here on the CROO screen that it automatically is associating with that 2016 action plan, with that most recently approved action plan. Now, where we've been spending a lot of our discussion today is on the CR05, and this is all of the accomplishment data. And opening the CR05 screen, it has a very similar table to the goals and accomplishments MicroStrategy report, in that it's listing out the goals, and then the anticipated outcome and the actual outcome. And then it has the same table for the overall strategic plan. Now, the important thing here, just in first glance, and both Beth and I mentioned this at the very beginning of the session, is that all of the data here in the accomplishments, it is being organized by goal. And so we'll see here, it's organized starting with goal number 1, coordination, goal number 2 related to community facilities, community policing, infrastructure, public services. And you have the expected value, and this matches up with the action plan, with the goal outcome indicator that you associated in the action plan for each of those goals. Where any accomplishments had been realized or recorded in IDIS, it will automatically pull and enter those. So you see here under goal number 3, under community policing, and we see that there's 95,000 people who are listed there as a recipient or benefactor of that goal. Now, in completing this, you, as we were just discussing, may have created your CAPER before entering all of your goals. You may have some goals that were tied to, or some accomplishments that were tied to multiple goals, or that were not tied at all to a strategic plan goal. All of these fields can be edited and can be updated if you have to make any edits. And again, I think for almost all of you on the line, as you're going through working on your CAPER, you will need to make some edits to your CAPER in entering your accomplishment data and in entering that other data. With that in mind, to Beth's point, do make sure that you are going back in IDIS if you hadn't yet entered accomplishment data for the activities, that you are also doing that. And you do want to make sure that all of that data is getting correctly updated in IDIS as well. Just a couple of other pieces that I do want to point out in the CAPER template is here, just opening up the CR15 screen. Right, you do, again, all of these fields are edited, can be edited. So there, the amount expended during the program year could be entered. And you do have narrative fields throughout the CAPER template to describe or provide any supplemental information. I know both in accomplishments and in resources and investments, you may be leveraging state or local resources, and you would like to include that in the description. And you can use those narrative fields to supplement your CAPER and really tell your story. Just like the Complan template for the Complan and for the action plan, you have the corresponding reg for each screen, and in some cases, each field that is required in the CAPER. If you ever have a question of what needs to be going in here, or what will my field office be looking for, you have that reg citation that you can go back into and double check and say, okay, am I meeting what is asked in 91.520 is subparagraph A or subparagraph B or D, and answer those questions. the last piece here, you do have the option to upload 5 attachments. Beth was referencing you may want to include the PER or the PR26 report. If you've made any edits or amendments to those can be attached and uploaded here. Any additional information that you want to include can be uploaded and attached here. And in a minute, we'll be talking about the eCart, and that will be one of the documents that you also will be attaching. And you all are here, which I presume means that you've submitted a Complan and have submitted an action plan. So again, exactly the same process for submitting. You change the status bar from open in progress to submitted for review, and you save, and that will go directly to your field office. Anything else that you would like to highlight on the CAPER template before we move on to ESG?
So at the risk of sounding like a broken record, there are those must-dos that you really should take care of prior to setting up that CAPER. Make sure that your most recent annual action plan and any amendments are in review completed. Check those projects in your annual action plan and make sure that they're set up correctly. Get all your IDIS reports run and reconcile your data. And then also keep in mind that there are lots of reports and user guides out there to help you run those reports and reconcile that data prior to starting that CAPER.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Great points. Okay. Coming back here, and we'll just go through to the CAPER and ESG. ESG grantees are required to complete the CR60, CR70, and CR75 screens, all in the CAPER template. In lieu of the CR65 screen, grantees are required to use the eCart. And to upload that file, it is now a macro-enabled Excel file that can be uploaded to the CROO. As many of you may remember, last year it was embedded in a Word document. This year it can be uploaded directly as an Excel file, and it's using eCart version 5 that everyone should be using. Marlisa, anything else that you would just like to add here on the ESG requirements?
I would just say that as recipients are starting to complete their 2016 eCart, you may run into subrecipients that are still having difficulty with their CSV, their comma separated value report that's generated from HMIS or a comparable database. We expect that those who had trouble last year had established a plan with a timeline to come into compliance with the CSV requirement. If you are encountering subrecipients that are still having problems, they weren't able to meet the timeline or the plan that they established for 2015, please pretty much follow the same guidance that we issued last year and be in contact with your field office, your CPD representative, as well as myself, Marlisa Grogan, and we'll handle those cases and provide additional TA or guidance as necessary. But one other quick note about the 2015 eCart, we are still following up through field offices to collect those eCarts that had not been submitted or were submitted incorrectly. So if you know that that you have not submitted the eCart as an Excel file, either to IDIS or to your field office and to me, please make sure that you get that submission in as soon as possible. We're going to be following up with field offices to make sure that happens for the 2015 eCarts. And if your CAPER, your 2015 CAPER has been reviewed and reviewed and approved in the eCon planning suite, we're still accepting those just via email to the field and to myself. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Marlisa. And just we'll be sharing these slides shortly after today's session. But the resources on CAPER and ESG can all be found here, both in terms for ECAR FAQs, on the ESG requirements, and on those CSV export steps for subrecipients if anyone is having any questions or issues on that. I do, again, just in another couple of minutes, but just want to really just zero in, and we've been talking on these points throughout today's session. But again, if these are the points that you come away with in terms of your CAPER must-dos, before creating your CAPER, you want to make sure that your action plan is marked as review complete. Otherwise, that CAPER will not be correctly associated with your action plan. All of your amendments in IDIS for your corresponding program year, so here we're talking about your 2016 CAPER, it would be for your 2016 action plan. Those amendments are submitted and marked as review complete in IDIS before creating your CAPER. And ensuring that your action plan includes all of the correct projects that are associated with activities and have the correct program year. Doing a double check, you can do a printout of your AP35 screen and just make sure that you have, that you're associated with a goal, that those projects are the right year, and then you can double check and make sure that all of your activities are appropriately assigned to those projects. And then finally, all of your accomplishment data is entered in IDIS. 90% of the questions that we receive related to an issue with the CAPER, something not populating in the CAPER correctly, or someone having questions on how the data really comes back to these 4 bullets here. And either the action plan or the amendment wasn't marked as complete, or there were duplicative projects in the action plan, or the accomplishment data wasn't entered in IDIS. And I think just one final bullet that we don't have on the slide, but we've talked a lot about today and would also want to include, would be making sure that you're using the additional MicroStrategy reports, you're using the Complan goals and accomplishments report to help get a snapshot of what does your CAPER data look like before you create that CAPER. And then you can realize that you may have some additional fixes or updates that you need to make before you start in on your CAPER. And again, if you've already created that CAPER template and you're working in your 2016 CAPER, you do not need to start all over, create a new CAPER template and manually copy that narrative. Just go ahead and use the goals and accomplishments report, use the other MicroStrategy reports that we talked about today, and then manually enter that data into the Complan template. Okay, and with that in mind, just a couple of common issues that we see, and I think some of these line with the questions that you all are submitting, so we'll go through these quick and then open it up for questions from you all, is the issue is that the accomplishment data includes accomplishments not associated with a strategic or annual plan goal. And this may be due to your accomplishments. They were realized or tied to a project or activity that is coming from a prior year, or using a different matrix code that differs from the goal outcome indicator that was included in the action plan and project. To correct this, you can always just manually adjust the accomplishment information in the CAPER. Second issue is that not all of your accomplishment data is appearing in the CAPER. And this is likely because that CAPER was created before the accomplishment data was entered in the activity screen. Once your accomplishment data is entered in IDIS, again, use the Complan goals and accomplishments report to see the updated tables, and then you can manually adjust the CAPER to include all of that accomplishment data. Again, use that report. You really want to use your CAPER to tell your story and share all of the successes that you've had over the last year. And then finally, a common issue we see is that activities from prior Complans are not appearing in the CAPER. Accomplishments from any activity that was created or tied to a prior Complan will not automatically appear in the CR05 screen, and you must manually add that accomplishment data, pulling from the MicroStrategy report, the Complan MicroStrategy report, and the other MicroStrategy reports to gather that data. Beth, before we open it up for questions, anything else that you would like to add, or Marlisa, anything else that you would like to add?
I think we've covered it all, but Chris has said some really important pieces, and that is really use your reports and don't create a new template if you already have. Just use the reports to reconcile your data, but whenever possible, if you have the opportunity, use the reports to update all of your data in your prior year plans prior to creating the CAPER. It'll limit the amount of reconciliation you have to do in the system.
Well, John, it looks like a number of questions have come in.
They sure have, Chris. So let's get right to them. So first one, actually a couple on these. Can I upload attachments to the CAPER? And another one similar to that is, how does the PR26 get included, and in what section does it get attached to?
Great question. So let's just come back here to our CAPER menu. You can upload up to 5 attachments from the CROO screen. This is very similar to the functionality for uploading attachments within the Complan and the action plan. That you actually have a little bit more flexibility in the file types that you can upload here, just to include those Excel files for the eCart, and so you're able to upload up to 5 attachments. And if you are including your PR26, this is where you can include that PR26 as part of your CAPER.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Let's go to another one. Second question, can you repeat the requirements for the eCart? An ESG question.
Marlisa, are you able to just go over the requirements for the eCart one more time? I can pull it
Sure.
for you.
Okay, so the eCart is submitted in lieu of CR7 or CR65. Previously, recipients had filled out the tables on screen CR65. Now, as of the 2015 CAPER, so for your 2016 CAPER, you'll leave those tables blank and instead attach your eCart to CR00. And the eCart, which is now version 5, posted on the HUD Exchange, that is the version that should be used as of all CAPERs submitted after October 2016. That corresponds to the HMIS critical updates that were in effect at the same time. So just a brief synopsis of how the data flows here. Recipients will gather their comma separated value CSV reports from their subrecipients all of those CSV files get uploaded into the CAPER, the Excel file, and that Excel file gets attached to CR00. And now the eCon Planning Suite can accept Excel files, so you no longer have to embed them in a Word document, which had been the case in the past. So all your eCarts should be, it should be data that's pulled directly from your HMIS or from a comparable database for domestic violence providers. And that is what gets submitted, one eCart file per recipient to screen CR00. And all of the guidance documents that are included in on the slide towards the end here go into the steps in detail, and the AAQ is also available to everyone if you need additional support.
Great, thank you, Marlisa. John, other questions coming in?
Yeah. Here's one. Do consortia or regional grantees do CAPERs together?
That's a great question. And no, consortia grantees and regional plan grantees are all responsible for their own CAPER. So if you are a participating grantee in a home consortia, even though the lead grantee was responsible for creating the Complan and submitting the Complan and creating the action plan and submitting the action plan, you are doing your own CAPER. And in that CAPER is where you're highlighting and zeroing in on the accomplishments related to the CPD funds, either CDBG or CDBG and ESG, that you are receiving directly from HUD. The lead entity will respond to the CAPER elements related to the home program, but as the participating grantee, you are doing your own CAPER as it relates to your block grant and or ESG program.
Thanks, Chris. Here's two related ones. When is the CAPER due again? And then one grantee just wanted to give an example if their fiscal year or program year ended on June 30th.
Great. So the CAPER is due 90 days after the end of your program year. So for those ending on June 30th, testing my math with there being 2 months of 31, but it would be what would be the 27th or 28th. It would be 90 days after the end of your program year, so it would be September 27th or 28th. At that point.
The important thing to remember is calendar days.
Yes.
Good point. Okay, let's go. Well, let's just jump back to an ESG one. Do we manually enter ESG data, or does IDIS automatically retrieve it from the Excel file?
Marlisa, I can start on this, and then maybe you can add a little bit more.
Yep.
But I think this is talking here in the CR65 screen. So you actually don't need to do the CR65 screen. The eCart is in lieu of the CR65 screen. So there's no need for that data to also then be entered in the CR65. You can leave that blank. And Marlisa, maybe you could just talk a little bit more of how the eCart is pulling all that data. And again, we can direct everyone after today's session to the guidance material on the eCart.
Right. So, so subrecipients, like the direct providers of the ESG services who are doing HMIS data entry, they extract a CSV file from their HMIS, or they can have their HMIS vendor do that. They send the CSV file to recipients, and then the ESG recipient imports all of those CSV files for all of their subrecipients into one eCart tool, one Excel file. And that Excel file gets attached to the CR00 screen, It doesn't import, that data doesn't import to any of the eCon Planning Suite screens. It just stays as that one Excel file on screen CR00. For the other screens, for CR60, for CR70 and CR75, the data is manually entered. So for CR70, you're manually entering in your shelter utilization numbers. For CR75, manually entering your expenditure data information. And I should clarify, for CR60, you're going to be entering in your subrecipient information from the available subrecipient list, and then entering in the award information using the buttons, or entering in the dollar amount and the drop downs.
Great. Thank you, Marlisa. Great. John, other questions coming in?
Oh yeah, we have several more. Here's one. What happens if the prior year CAPER has not been marked review completed in IDIS? Can I generate the 2016 or /2017 CAPER?
That's a great question. So if your prior year CAPER is still under review, or if there are edits being made to it, you can still create your FY 2016 CAPER, as long as the corresponding action plan, your 2016 action plan, is marked as review completed. If you do have questions on those CAPERs being marked as review completed, you can always follow up with your field office and to make sure that you're working through to get those CAPERs marked as review completed. But you can start your current CAPER as long as your action plan, that's the important piece, as long as your action plan is marked as review completed.
Thanks, Chris. And another one, will you go over how to manually update your CAPER?
Oh, absolutely.
Review that again.
Just come back here into IDIS. I'm just opening up the CR05 screen. And so here we have our expected and actual values. All of these values can be updated. So let's just say here I want to change this number to 3. We'll go ahead and click Save and Return. And I open that field back up, and I see now that that actual is 3. So that is the process within IDIS of manually updating those fields. The important place of gathering that data is from the MicroStrategy reports, both the Complan and the other MicroStrategy reports related to CDBG and Home and ESG, and using those to provide that additional data.
Okay. We have another ESG question. For the ESG eCard, if you have multiple ESG subrecipients and each is creating their HMIS data, how are these to be attached to the CR00 when there are only 5 attachments allowed? Are they all combined? Please advise.
Okay, so the ESG recipient who has the who would download the eCart tool from the HUD Exchange, the recipient would take all of those 5 CSV files that they received from their subrecipients, or let's say for a larger grantee, you have 20 subrecipients. The recipient would take those 20 CSV files from all of those subrecipients, and then the recipient would upload all of those files into the eCart tool. And then that one eCart tool, which is an Excel file, that one file gets attached to the CR00. So the recipient's never attaching more than one eCart to CR00 in the eCon planning suite. And I can tell you that we have one resource which lays it out with screenshots and everything and makes it a little bit easier to understand with a visual. And that is the eCart CSV export submission steps for subrecipients. So it gets into more detail about what a CSV file is, how many files are actually included in the CSV, which are 32. And it's really handy, especially if you have a lot of different subrecipients and subrecipients that have a number of different projects. So it can get pretty much into the weeds, but the that second resource there, the CSV export steps for subrecipients, is very helpful in going through each step.
Great. Thank you, Marlisa. Let me just, and we're just about out of time, so just wanted to pull back up here our CAPER must-dos. And again, just as we wrap up today's call, the reminders are just make sure your action plan is marked as complete. Make sure all your amendments are submitted and marked as complete. All of your projects are appropriately tied to your action plan and have the goal outcome indicators. And then all of your accomplishment data has been entered in IDIS. Beth, Marlisa, before we wrap up, any closing thoughts from you all?
Nothing else from me.
And I would just point everyone to the AAQ as well. If you're having any questions about how to do something or you're getting stuck, we try to get responses to the AAQ out as quickly as possible. I know it's slow sometimes, but don't hesitate to use that as a reference and a resource.
Great. Well, thank you, Beth. Thank you, Marlisa. Thank you all for joining us. And we will make sure to send out all the resources that we've discussed, and we'll let you all know when the and the recording are posted. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.